Top UN human rights experts have stated very clearly that Israel is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza, and that foreign governments supporting Israel can be complicit in these crimes. And in particular, top UN legal experts have called on foreign states to stop giving weapons to Israel. And they've gone further and stated that Western weapons corporations can be considered complicit in these crimes that Israel is committing. And they added that major Western banks on Wall Street and asset management firms like BlackRock, they named BlackRock specifically, along with US banks like JP Morgan and Bank of America. According to UN human rights experts, these Western financial institutions can also be considered complicit in the war crimes that Israel is committing in Gaza and are profiting from those war crimes. This was made very clear in a statement that was published by the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, titled, "States and Companies Must End Arms Transfers to Israel Immediately or Risk Responsibility for Human Rights Violations," according to UN experts. I'm going to read a few clips from this document because it names some of the Western companies that are complicit in these war crimes and are profiting. Now, it states, "The transfer of weapons and ammunition to Israel may constitute serious violations of human rights and international humanitarian laws and risk state complicity in international crimes, possibly including the G-side crime," which I don't say because this will be censored. This is according to UN experts, and they reiterated their demand to stop arms transfers immediately. They noted that the UN Human Rights Council and independent UN experts have stated that Israel is committing war crimes. And in particular, they say that these are some of the Western companies that are supplying Israel with military equipment. BAE Systems, Boeing, Caterpillar, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Oshkosh, Rheinmetall, Rolls-Royce Power Systems, RTX, and ThyssenKrupp. These companies must end their transfers to Israel. Research shows that the vast majority of weapon shipments to Israel come from the US, 66%, but Germany also provides 30% of the weapons that go to Israel, and Italy provides another 5% of the weapons that go to Israel. So the US, Germany, and Italy have been arming Israel. While naming these Western companies as complicit in arming Israel, the UN human rights experts emphasized that the International Court of Justice at The Hague ordered Israel to immediately halt its military offensive in Rafah in Gaza, where roughly 1 million civilians were trapped. Israel completely ignored that ruling by The Hague, violating it. And The Hague also stated that the G-side crime can be a plausible risk. Furthermore, the UN human rights experts stressed that the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has sought arrest warrants against Israeli leaders over war crimes and crimes against humanity. The ICC applied for arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Now, further in this statement, these UN human rights experts name several Western financial institutions that have invested in these arms companies that are supporting Israel, giving weapons to Israel. And these UN human rights experts emphasized that the following Western financial companies can be considered complicit, including Bank of America, BlackRock, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, State Street, Vanguard, Wells Fargo, and there are many other firms, including some European firms that are not as well known in the US. And these UN human rights experts emphasize that, quote, failure to prevent or mitigate their business relationships with these arms manufacturers transferring arms to Israel could move from being directly linked to human rights abuses to contributing to them with repercussions for complicity in potential atrocity crimes. BlackRock is an investment company based in New York City, and it's the world's largest asset manager. It manages $10.5 trillion in assets, which is larger than the GDP of almost every country on earth. And what does that mean? It means that rich people in the US and around the world, that they hold their wealth in assets and things like stocks and bonds and real estate. And many of those investments are managed full time. And in return, BlackRock takes a small percentage of the capital gains made by these oligarchs. So essentially, BlackRock is an institution that exists to make the rich richer and richer and richer. And it has really done that, not only in the US, but serving oligarchs all around the world. BlackRock has heavily invested in Israel, and it actually has an entire website which is about BlackRock in Israel. And not only has BlackRock invested in Israeli assets, thereby helping to sustain Israel's illegal occupation of Palestinian territory and profiting from its war crimes, but moreover, BlackRock has also invested very heavily in Western weapons corporations like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing, which are arming Israel and are profiting from Israel's war crimes. Peace activists in New York have held protests outside BlackRock's headquarters in New York City, condemning the asset manager for profiting from Israel's war crimes and making those war crimes possible, helping to facilitate them. But of course, it's not just BlackRock. There are many other Western financial institutions that have invested heavily in Israel and are profiting from these war crimes. And these include some of the top banks on Wall Street, like Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, and some other major Western banks like the German bank Deutsche Bank or the French bank BNP Paribas. These were the banks that helped to underwrite Israeli bonds. What does this mean? Well, when a government or a company wants to issue bonds, that is debt, investors want to buy those, usually they need an underwriter, which means that a financial institution will essentially insure the bonds, make sure that there's collateral to back the bonds. And in many cases, what they do is they simply buy the bonds from the issuer, in this case, the Israeli colonial regime, and then those financial institutions will sell the bonds on behalf of the government or the company, in this case, Israel. So these Wall Street banks are helping Israel find Western investors who want to profit from Israel's activities. Because if you buy a government bond, you're helping to finance that government's activities. It's a government IOU. And these bonds that Israel issued offer 5% interest. So what's happening is these Wall Street banks and other European banks, they are guaranteed what's known as a spread, a profit from selling these bonds on behalf of Israel. So quite literally, they are profiting from Israel's crimes. They are making it possible for Israel to continue funding its operations as it carries out crimes against humanity in Gaza. Again, these are the Western banks that are underwriting Israeli bonds. Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, BNP Paribas, and Deutsche Bank. Now, it's obvious that the US federal government is strongly supporting Israel, giving it billions of dollars in weapons and military assistance, but it's also US state governments that are investing in Israel and helping to fund its war crimes. And in fact, US state governments have invested in hundreds of millions of dollars of Israeli bonds. And this was just in the first month of the Israeli war on Gaza. As of November 2023, this was reported at 300 million of US state government investments in Israeli bonds. The number has likely increased very significantly since then. But in just 1 month, as Israel was brutally bombing Gaza, the following states invested in Israeli bonds: Florida, Indiana, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Arkansas, Georgia, Illinois, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. And by far the biggest was Florida, which in 1 month invested over $140 million in Israeli bonds, that is Israeli government debt, helping to fund Israel's war crimes. And it's of course noteworthy that most of these states are governed by Republicans, but it's not just Republicans, it's also Democrat-run states like New York and Illinois that are investing in Israel's war crimes. So this is very much bipartisan. And The Guardian, the British newspaper that reported this, pointed out the irony that US conservative politicians from the Republican Party love to complain about the so-called politicization of US government spending. But the majority of this money comes from these very same conservative politicians who have no problem investing in the most political thing of all, the Israeli regime, as it's carrying out crimes against humanity in Gaza. Now, before I conclude here, I want to briefly address a manufactured scandal that the media was obsessed with this June, which was that US President Joe Biden supposedly canceled a video meeting with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes. And the liberal journalists in the Western media tried to use this as an example of how Biden is supposedly standing up to Netanyahu. And in particular, this story came from an Israeli journalist, Barak Ravid, who is very closely linked to the Israeli government and also to the US government. And many of his scoops come directly from very friendly government sources. This June, the Western media tried to craft this narrative claiming that supposedly Netanyahu was angry because Biden is not sending him enough weapons. And Netanyahu claimed that supposedly the US is withholding large bombs from Israel. But this, of course, is not true. Immediately after this, the Biden administration responded saying very clearly, we are giving Israel all of these weapons. We have no idea what Netanyahu's talking about. And this just shows this is a manufactured media scandal. Western journalists, especially liberals who are sympathetic to Biden and can see how bad it looks that the Democrats are supporting this far-right fascistic regime in Israel that is carrying out crimes against humanity, and someone like Netanyahu, who is a close personal friend of Donald Trump. Some of the Democrats are trying to claim, look, Biden is supposedly standing up to Netanyahu, but it's simply not true. This is what some liberal journalists want people to think, but it is completely false. Just hours after Netanyahu made those comments and Biden supposedly canceled a video call, just hours later, top Israeli officials held meetings with Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, and with the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. So while the media is trying to make this false narrative that Biden is finally standing up to Netanyahu, in reality, top US officials continue having close relations with the Israeli regime, supporting the Israeli regime as it carries out these crimes. And billions of dollars of US weapons continue flowing to Israel. As the Washington Post put it, US floods arms into Israel, despite these well-documented war crimes. And although Biden claimed for months that if Israel attacks Rafah, that he would stop supporting Israel, that was a red line, he lied. It was complete PR. It was a marketing stunt, because what we actually see is that even after Israel invaded Rafah, where 1 million Palestinian civilians were trapped, the Biden administration has continued sending over $1 billion worth of weapons and ammunition to Israel. So the US government has continued. There is no change in the Biden administration's policy. And of course, Donald Trump 100% supports Israel as well. The Republicans and Democrats 100% support Israel. US support for Israel's colonial crimes are bipartisan. And as I discussed today, it's not just political support. It's also support from big capitalists, financial interests on Wall Street. These capitalist oligarchs are making a killing off of Israel's killing in Gaza. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton, the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. Please share this, and I will see you all next time.